My name is Jack. I'm a junior and I'm from Queens, New York. So I've lived there my entire life. So I went to high school in Jamaica, Queens, at a high school called Queens High School for the Sciences at your college. I think when thinking back on my K to 12 schooling, I'm really thinking of a time that was full of kind of happy moments, but also moments where I felt like it was very difficult. And I'm recalling the times for the happy moment of like recess or like times where I could spend moments off with friends during lunchtime or during times when I had off. Then I'm also reminded of times when I panicked over tests, over grades, over what I would do in the future. I think school was definitely full of a lot of anxieties, but also full of a lot of great happy moments. I wasn't very much of a math person or a STEM person, so in high school I was very much interested in history, social studies, and English for the most part. As for what drew me to the subjects, I can't really say for sure. Maybe a part of it is that the subjects they came a bit easier for me than math, but I think another part of it is that those subjects helped me kind of escape into a different world that I did not live in. So for English, reading books and reading stories that other people write helped me kind of relate and see experiences different from my own. And I think that's the case for history and social studies as well, when you learn about different cultures and different groups of people. So economics is a very quantitative study. It's pretty mathematical. I didn't really know that when first going in, but yeah, it's a little bit different, but it's still a social science, and we still focus a lot on kind of human interactions and the studies of like behavior. And I think that's also what drew me to economics. And I can still say that English and history and all the subjects that I liked in high school, I still very much enjoy learning about in college. I think from elementary school all throughout high school, I attended majority Asian or Asian American schools. So like the student body were mostly composed of people who looked like me. And I think like in retrospect, I'm not sure if that was a great experience. I guess I'm feeling conflicted about kind of thinking on what made those schools majority Asian and Asian American. But I can say that it was certainly like helpful to know that a lot of the students at the schools I attended looked like me. They had the similar backgrounds as myself. Many of them were from immigrant backgrounds, so I could more readily relate to them and kind of share experiences with them. And I guess that helped me make friends and helped me have something to talk about with them. So that was definitely helpful. I think it's a very complicated thing, segregation, and kind of relating that to my high school at least. I wouldn't really say that my elementary and middle schools were segregated per se, just because that the neighborhoods in which they were kind of in were of very similar demographics as the students that attended those schools. But for high school, at least, Jamaica, Queens is a very Black/African American heavy neighborhood, but the school at which I attended was very heavily Asian and Asian American. So I guess when it comes to the word segregated and segregation, I feel like that word's kind of inextricably linked to race, even though like people don't really want it to be. So like when I hear it in most contexts, it's related to race in some way. In terms of high school, I do think that it was segregated, not in the traditional sense that it was kind of mandated by law or like someone forced it upon the school, but I think with specialized high school exams, because my high school was a specialized high school, and the whole system of examinations, it just came to be that most of the people who scored well enough to get into my high school were Asian and Asian American families. When I'm thinking of diversity and inclusion, I'm really thinking of like these like policies, more recent policies actually, because like I don't think I've heard of diversity and inclusion as much when I was growing up, but like I think in recent years it's become more like publicized and like a hot topic of like schools or like companies or like just people in general, establishments, places in general, trying to open up areas that were traditionally kind of dominated by a certain group of people to people that were underrepresented or like underserved at these areas. So like I'm thinking of stuff like affirmative action policies. I think that has a lot to do with diversity and inclusion. I'm thinking about kind of policies at a lot of companies where they have special programs for minorities and people of color and women and LGBTQ people. So I think it's a kind of it's something that we should be talking about more, but something I kind of have a qualm about with that is how a lot of people kind of just do the talking, but they don't put any action behind what they say. I think everyone kind of wants diversity and inclusion. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't want that, but it's really how we get there that a lot of people have problems with. Like affirmative action isn't the most popular thing in this country, even though there's like a history of segregation and discrimination against certain groups of people. It's really always comes down to how we choose to kind of act on what we promise and how we even the playing field in an equitable way for everybody involved. That's always a problem. So for elementary school and for middle school, I went to schools that were pretty close to where I lived. My elementary school was within walking distance from where I lived. And even though like you're not really supposed to let a fourth grader go home by themselves, I did that very often. And for middle school, it was within walking distance until I moved in the 7th grade. Then I had to commute. It was about like half an hour for the commute. But for high school, I attended a school that was pretty far from where I lived. So I lived in like the north of Queens, the very tippy north of Queens, and I had to commute all the way to the very bottom of Queens, the south of Queens, to attend high school. And that was because the high school that I attended was the only specialized high school in Queens, which is why I kind of decided that I wanted to go there, because if I attended any other specialized high school, I would have to commute even further. So that was about a 1-hour commute. It was like, it was just one bus, but like, it was literally the first stop to the very last stop. And in regards to my relationship to the community of the schools that I went to, I think I felt very at home, I guess. I felt very much like I belonged when I was in elementary school and middle school. The community that I was surrounded by was very much like the community that I went to school in, if that makes sense. So the people outside were just like the people that I saw at school. But in high school that was different, because the students and my classmates were of, like, they were different than the people who are outside of the school. And I guess the relationship between my high school and Jamaica, the neighborhood that it was in, I think is a very fraught one. It was one that had a lot of problems, and I don't know how to really rationalize that, like how a majority Asian enclave, whether or not it belongs in a neighborhood that was predominantly black, and that should really be serving the community that it was in. Looking back, I would say that I don't think my high school was ever short on funding. I do remember reading in the news or in the headlines how like the specialized high school get all these like special funding, and like how my high school received quite a bit of funding. But whether or not I saw that funding and whether or not like I felt that funding when I attended school is a different question, I think. So had we had adequate funding, I think we would have had our own building. I think we would have had our own facilities. I think we would have had our own place where we could have where we could make lunch. So our school was the building in which our school was in was kind of on loan, I guess, on lease from the college that was nearby. The gym that we attended was also not ours. The library was not ours. Nothing really felt like ours, and I guess that felt a little weird as a high school student, that we didn't have anything of our own. And something else was that our entire school pretty much was on one floor of one building that was not ours. That felt very surreal and strange, how they squeezed 400 students into one floor of a tiny building. So no, I don't think that the funding at least was allocated adequately, that we, the students, kind of received kind of the resources that we needed. I felt like a lot of the teachers were overworked. I felt like the resources were not there. A lot of the textbooks were really old, and sometimes we didn't even get textbooks because they could not afford it. So yeah, I don't think it was great. When I think of adequately supported academically, I think my high school definitely was there, but I think rather than adequately support me, I think my high school kind of pushed me too far along the academic path. So they pushed everyone to take certain AP classes and take the examinations. All of our classes were honors classes, and the expectations for us, I guess compared to a normal high school in New York City, was different. They expected more out of us, and I guess rightfully so, since we were a specialized high school, but there was very much a pressure to succeed, a pressure to do well academically, and a pressure to get into college. But when college application season came around, I don't think I had any support, or much support at all, when it came to researching colleges, applying to colleges, and submitting the college application. I mean, the guidance counselor was there, but I had to kind of take the initiative to meet with them myself. We didn't really have much support besides maybe one day where we reviewed the college essay. I filled out the college application myself on my own, and that was not the easiest thing to do, because I'm a first generation college student, and navigating that thing as a first timer isn't easy at all. Financial aid forms and all of that were like a mess to figure out, but yeah, I had to do most of that myself, and the school wasn't really there to help me, even though for the past 4 years that I was there, I was pushed academically to succeed and to get into college. But once it came, they kind of just left me out in the dust. At my high school, because my high school is pretty small, we didn't have much extracurriculars at all. So we didn't really have the same extracurriculars like a larger high school that would have, because we didn't even have our own facilities technically. But I remember in high school that I was part of a club called No Place for Hate. That was an organization that kind of advocated for social issues like gun violence, for example. We attended a few events like around the city, doing poetry and kind of speaking as high schoolers. I initially joined that organization because my friend kind of pressured me into it, but I slowly grew to like the club. And besides that, I mean, I was in high school orchestra for a year, though I did quickly realize that music performance was not really for me, and I dropped out after a year. Besides those organizations, I don't really think I was really involved or as involved as I should have been. I don't think there was much that I could do at school, and I felt like because there was so much focus on my academics and doing well in my classes that I didn't really have the time to kind of spend on extracurriculars or like doing other things that I might have liked to do. Yeah. For the most part, I felt like the community in my high school was pretty competitive, but also in a way supportive. At least the people that I chose to surround myself with, they kind of, we supported each other. We if someone did not do well on an exam, we kind of consoled one another. We spent a lot of time outside of school, just hanging out and doing what friends do. But I think that there was another side of high school that I didn't want to involve myself with, which was really the kind of super competitive, like almost cutthroat competition around like grades, academics, success. Because my school was so academically focused, there was a kind of a very high emphasis to get the highest grades possible. And to achieve that end, I think people did whatever they could. I think cheating was pretty rampant at my high school, and I feel like that's a very big problem at a lot of specialized high schools, because there's just the pressure to do well, and people only have so much time to study and devote to classes, so to kind of compensate for that, they cheat. So I sort of understand that sentiment, but that mentality has just, after looking back at least in high school, I don't think I was surrounded by the best people sometimes, but I think for the most part I felt like high school was good because of who I was around. My parents did pressure me to take that just because they wanted me to get into a good high school, so I really kind of understood where they came from, so I didn't feel angry or like about their decisions. And myself, I also kind of shared that same sentiment with my parents, that I wanted to get into a good high school so that I could be prepared for the future. So I studied for that and I took that exam. And fortunately, I scored well enough to get into one, specialized high school. In regards to like AP exams, I said this before, but like how my school kind of mandated that we were supposed to take some AP exams regardless of whether or not we felt prepared to take it or whether or not we wanted to take it. I believe AP English, AP US History, and AP Calculus were like three of them that we kind of had to take. I think I would have taken a lot of these classes myself anyway, but the fact that we weren't given the choice to take them really didn't sit well with me. I didn't think that the school should have forced a lot of the students to take these classes, because having been in these classes, I don't think a lot of the people were prepared for kind of the content, or like really wanted to be there, and that really diminishes kind of the quality of the class when half the students don't really feel like they want to learn anything that's being taught. So that was that. And in regards to the SAT, yes, I felt immense pressure to take the SAT. I think that was a shared sentiment at our school, that the SAT was kind of the be all end all of the college admission process. And looking back, I'm very wrong about that, because I don't even remember my SAT score anymore. But I think even like starting off even from the PSAT, that's the practice SAT, we kind of just crammed and did all these like studying things. We went to kind of tutoring, we went to prep. I think all of us tried our very best to do as well as we could on the SAT, because we were kind of, I guess, conditioned to kind of take tests, because we took the SHSAT, all of us at our high school, to get in. So we already know this kind of feeling of feeling pressure to take exams. And I think all throughout high school, it was just exams, 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 exams. So I guess that just breeds kind of like a feeling of disillusionment at these exams, and kind of like, oh, it's just another exam. The SAT is just another exam with like, it matters a little bit more, but it's just another exam. And that wasn't the best feeling, but I think we got through it, and I'm glad it's over, because I hate exams.
What does being Asian American mean to you?
Yeah, I think when I'm thinking of the word Asian American, the term, the first thing that comes to mind is really being a marginalized group in this country, because I think in comparison to a few other minority groups like Latino Americans or like Black Americans, we definitely have kind of the lowest share of the American population, but then we're also kind of hyper-represented in other spheres of life, like academia. I think for sure that we're always kind of seen as high performers. But I think on another kind of side of it is that when I'm thinking of Asian American, I really picture East Asians. I'm thinking of Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and maybe Vietnamese Americans. But I realize that Asian American encompasses the whole of the Asian continent. And me thinking that, me first picturing East Asians, I guess says something about myself and that term. And I feel like the term Asian American is problematic because of that reason, that it attempts to kind of put an entire continent of people under one mold, that we're all like this, we're all high achievers, or like we all succeed when we come to America. And I don't think that's true at all. I think Asian American encompasses a very wide spectrum of people, and to have that entire spectrum under one word is problematic. I think in sometimes it kind of unifies us. I think like when we talk of instances of like Asian hate and like violence against Asian Americans, it does kind of bring the community together and kind of makes us feel like we're part of the struggle, and I think that's a great feeling. But when it comes to kind of stereotypes about us, I don't like that term, because it just encompasses it just doesn't fit the lived experiences of every Asian American in this country. I really despise the term model minority. I feel like for a lot of Asian Americans like myself, it's kind of a term that just hangs over our head, especially when we're in school, or even in the workplace. It's just like something that's there, expectations that other people have of you before they even get to know you. And I definitely have internalized a lot of that kind of feeling, because people expect me to do well. I also expect myself to do well, and it's definitely not a very healthy mindset sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's good because I push myself to do the best that I can, and I think that's a good thing. But sometimes I really think that I push myself too far. That if I score like 1 or 2 points lower than I wanted, then I would say like, oh, this is very unbecoming of me. This is like not what I should be expected to get, and it really comes down to kind of feeling like whose expectations are these really? Because the model minority is imposed upon me by society, and I've begun to internalize these expectations. Are they really my expectations, or are they really the expectations of outsiders? Um, and yeah, I said before that I'm kind of horrible at math, but I think growing up my entire life, there's been nothing but expectations that I would do well mathematically, that I would just be some math genius of sorts. And that's not true at all. I'm still pretty bad at math, but I'm gradually improving. But I was definitely more of like a humanities and English person, and I think that kind of expectation of me to do STEM, of me to do math, was also kind of not internalized, but like um, expressed by a lot of my friends, right? When I first entered college, I kind of wanted to do English, but when telling my Asian and Asian American friends about this, they kind of were like, what? Because Asians were expected to do math and science and other STEM subjects. So I felt like it wasn't only me and other people, but also my close friends, other Asian Americans, kind of internalizing this feeling that model minority meant that you had to abide by certain norms, that you had to go down certain paths, certain career fields, um, take take certain subjects in school and do well in them. But I guess having kind of been in school for so long, I kind of just feel like this model minority thing is dumb, and we should just figure out a way to rid ourselves of that. I don't really think much, if at all. There was kind of exposure on Asian American history. I mean, in like AP World History, we learned about like the ancient civilizations of Asia, and we touched upon like some history about that. But it was definitely not a focus of the class, and it was just something that was there because it had to be there, because city standards or like state standards or like AP standards mandated that these classes teach about Asian history. But I don't think that any teacher of mine, at least, taught Asian history because they wanted to, or because they thought it was important for us, and not because it was important because other people told them it had to be in there. I don't think there was like a class dedicated to Asian history or Asian American history. I think I learned barely anything about Asian American history, actually, until I came to college and I took courses on them. I think maybe we touched upon like the Chinese Exclusion Act for like 15 minutes of one class period, but that's as much exposure as we get in high school to these things. Where like at my high school, I think growing up and even to this day, you feel like you don't really belong in either space, in America or in China. If I went back to China, I would not be considered Chinese. I would be considered American because I don't have any of the cultural upbringing that a lot of the Chinese people in China have. But here in America, I don't feel like I'm an American, even though I've lived here my entire life, because of the fact that I don't look like a white American, but also because I feel like I grew up with immigrant parents that spoke to me in Chinese. I learned English in school, and not because my parents spoke the language to me. So I really feel like for almost my entire life, I've just lived in this gray area between America and China, between Chinese and American, that I was both, but also neither at the same time. So I think that it's definitely a struggle to kind of come to terms with the fact that um, we're kind of in this third category of Chinese American or like Asian American. Um, but yeah, I think that gradually, um, at least like coming to college, realizing that it's okay to have both at the same time. You don't have to kind of like get rid of one to kind of get the other. That you can be Chinese American, because I think in elementary school and middle school and high school there was a part of me that didn't want to be Chinese, just because I was in the United States and there are all these societal expectations to kind of adopt American norms and adopt American ways of beliefs and whatnot. But fortunately, in college, I think I was able to kind of immerse myself with Chinese culture, Chinese language, and kind of realize that it's important to kind of accept the two sides of myself. That, even though I was born to immigrant parents who are both from China, who don't speak English, that I myself am allowed to speak English and allowed to kind of be American, but also accept the fact that I'm Chinese and I should be proud of that because of all the struggles that my parents went through to come here. So yeah, I think I've gradually come to terms with it.